Centuries ago, God's people were taken into exile under hostile rulers. Yet God equipped them, not only to survive, but to thrive. Through the book of Daniel, God shows us that when the world is dark, the light of Jesus can shine brightly. Shining like stars in the midst of the darkness, we don't aim to accept or reject the culture around us. We seek to redeem it.
Good morning, everyone watching here, everybody who's joining us online. My name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Hope. So glad to be able to be with you. And we are in part 6 of a long series that we're doing here where we're taking a look at what it looks like to truly live out our values, to see what it would actually be like if we could, in America in 2023, live according to our values, according to if the death and resurrection of Jesus were true, what would that look like to actually walk that out here and now? Because we want to be people who live distinctly within our culture, who know what cultural streams that we allow ourselves to flow with and which ones are worth swimming against. And so as you look through the different stories and the different narratives that are told in the Bible, we find that there is no better person to teach us what this looks like than Daniel, and that's where we've been spending a lot of our time. Daniel executes this to perfection in his lifetime. You see, Daniel lives in a pluralistic culture where you can do whatever it is that you want. You can worship whoever it is that you want in private, but in public, you have to bow down to the culture. And so Daniel faced obstacle after obstacle, moment after moment, where there were points of contention and adversity, places where he had a choice to make if he was going to compromise his faith or die, basically, if he was willing to just keep standing on what God had for him. And yet, it seems like if you walk through each of the chapters that we've seen so far, that Daniel is continually advancing. He's continually getting promotions. He's continually gaining the favor of these kings and moving onward and upward. He is a rising star in the empires that he is a part of. And it seems like every story of his has ended with him getting some kind of promotion or some king now proclaiming that God is the God and that he's good, or both. But Daniel probably wouldn't think of himself as a rising star. Daniel wouldn't think of himself as somebody who's up and coming in the world of ancient politics. Daniel probably just thinks that he is doing what he needs to do to survive. Daniel has to hold on to God. Daniel has to be good at navigating the cultural current because everything in Daniel's life is constantly changing. It's constantly in this shifting state. You see, Daniel starts off in, living a nice life in Jerusalem, and then Jerusalem gets ransacked and taken over, and he's shipped off to the empire of Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel survives the culture of King Nebuchadnezzar. He rises through the ranks, he gains favor with the king, he stays faithful to God, and he ends up in a place of prominence in that kingdom. But Nebuchadnezzar isn't king forever, and his descendants take over, and so Daniel has to start over again. And we see one of these descendants is King Belshazzar, and we talked about him last week. And Daniel survives the culture of King Belshazzar, and he doesn't give in to the allure that is presented to him of this inner circle of the king where he could have had everything that he wanted. He stays true to God in the midst of threats and in the midst of promises, and he somehow still gets promoted. But at the end of our story last week, Belshazzar dies and gets murdered. And now some new guy named Darius is in charge. And so yet again, Daniel has to start over. And all throughout this, Daniel has had incredible wisdom and incredible discernment to know when to go with the flow and to know when to take his stand, when to swim against the current. And each time that he does this, it's not like all of these stories are just kind of, back to back to back to back. Daniel has been taking decades of time which each of these approaches. With each new regime that comes in, it takes a long time and long effort and long faithfulness in order for Daniel to reach the places that he does. He has to grind and work. Each one takes decades of God-focused living in order to reach the places that Daniel reaches. And now, yet again, Daniel has to start all over again. He has to grind and earn favor and win influence while not compromising his faith again. And as we think about this for us, most of us probably don't feel like we have decades of energy within us to live distinctly, to hold on to the things that we really value. If we're really being honest, I know most of us don't even feel like we have days of energy, let alone decades. Swimming against the current is a really exhausting thing to do. Doing what honors our values all the time is exhausting. If we're trying to think about it, if we're here and we're living in the way of Jesus, living in the way of Jesus within culture is exhausting. Living just even according to what we believe can be exhausting. Think about it. If you're, just say you're on a diet. Let's say you're trying to do some new things. You're trying to live holistically. You're committed to taking care of yourself in a good way. That's a good thing, right? That's awesome. And you've made it through the weekend and you haven't had any major slip-ups and you're like, I'm feeling pretty good. And then Monday, some staff member brings in treats from the weekend to the break room and you just find yourself taking a few more trips past the break room than you normally would. Just to look, just to see what got brought in. And you want to stay committed, right? You want to honor the values that are going on inside of you, but then you look again and you realize, well, gosh darn it, they're homemade. Not speaking from experience or anything. I'm just saying, hypothetically, the break room becomes dangerous to wanting to live according to your values, right? Or maybe consider that you've got a bit of a temper problem. You find yourself a little quick to anger. But you want to calm down, and you're realizing that this is a way that you want to live. You want to live according to some better values of love and peace and being slow to anger, and you're doing pretty good. You went to church in the morning, and you feel like you're off to a good start, and then as you're leaving, somebody maybe doesn't use a blinker when they should or pulls out in front of you in the parking lot. And then you let loose with a couple of words that, can't be said on stage, much less in a church parking lot. And you say, okay, well, next time will be better. I missed it that time, but next time will be good. Or you're a student, and you're realizing that the peer pressure that is around you is swirling and it's growing stronger and stronger, and you're trying to stay above it because you have some goals and you have some aspirations and you have some things you feel like you're supposed to be doing and these things won't help you in the long run, but the current to just give up and to give in keeps getting stronger, and you don't really know what to do. Or maybe you're at work, and there's a lot of office politics that get played, and you find yourself getting passed over for promotions or chances or opportunities because you're committed to living in a way that is doing right by the people around you. And maybe your time will come, but you're running out of strength to try to keep your head above the fray. Maybe you're a business owner and you're seeing everybody else around you that's getting ahead and they're making lots of money, but you've chosen to honor this value deep inside of you where you want to put people over profits, but now you're realizing that, those things might be holding you back, even though you really want to try to honor them. There's going to come a moment in your life where you realize you do not have the strength to continually swim against the current, that you don't have the energy to continue to live distinctly. There's going to come a moment where maybe you don't want to anymore. It's easier to just complain about it. It's easier to just give into it. But to keep doing what's right again and again and again and again when there's seemingly no gain, how? How do we continue to keep living rightly? How do we continue to keep living distinctly? How do we continue to have the energy to do the right thing over and over and over and over again? Because it's way easier to just give in. It's way easier to just complain about how bad other people are. Not you, just other people. It's a lot easier to just give in and go along with what everybody else is doing, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. But to do the work of discernment and navigating the cultural current in the way of Jesus, to know which currents to go with and which currents to swim against, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of energy. It's a lot of relationships that might be broken. It's a lot of mental effort. It's a lot of cost. And it would be a lot easier to just quit. We tried to live right. We tried to do the Jesus thing, and it didn't quite work out. We didn't see the payoff in the way that we thought it would, so we're just going to quit. And so what we want to talk about today is, what do we do when we reach that point? Because all of us, at least aspirationally, we would like to be people who live by our values. We would like to be people who stand for something different. If we're trying to follow Jesus, we would like to say that we can live distinctly within the pluralistic culture around us. But how? Where does that strength come from to live in such a powerful, influential way when we just don't want to do it anymore? That's what we're going to find out today as we dive into Daniel's story. And so as you're following along, we're just going to start at the beginning of Daniel chapter 6 today. We are kind of moving through Daniel's story here, and we're just going to start right at the beginning, and we're going to see what it is that Daniel can teach us about where this strength comes from to continue to live distinctly. So for a chunk, this is Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 1, verses 1 through 4. So it says, it pleased Darius, so we'll stop right there. If you remember from last time, there was King Belshazzar who was in charge, and he threw this massive wild party and eventually ended up in this place where he died that night, and Darius is the guy who came in to take over. He's the leader of the Medes and the Persians, and so King Darius is now in charge. So it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So, you've got Darius, he took over, he's coming in, he's setting up his new cabinet, he's got all these governmental officials that are, coming in, and Daniel is a part of kind of this 3-headed CEO that's supposed to run the entire kingdom. And then Daniel, because of course Daniel he is so good at what he does, that King Darius is like, hey, I'm going to effectively make this guy second in command in this entire kingdom. He's going to be in charge of the guys who are in charge of everybody else in my cabinet. And so what we see here is that Daniel has continued to live this life of distinct living where he's honoring God and he's serving whatever king is in front of him. And Darius has noticed. Daniel is really, really good at what he does. And Darius is like, I'm going to make you in charge of almost everybody because of it. But there are some other people who have noticed as well, and they are not too happy with all of the promotions and all of the attention that Daniel receives. So get ready for some very fun ancient office politics. We're going to pick this up in Daniel chapter 6, verse 5. So all of the other guys who did not get promoted, they got together and they kind of hatched this little plan, and so this is what occurs. Finally, these men, so everybody else that got passed over, they said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king, and they said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown in the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which can't be repealed. So King Darius, of course, put the decree in writing. So, this is very interesting. So the Persians and Medes, they had these kind of rules set in place around how they made laws so that kings and people couldn't just go making laws whenever they wanted. And the rule was exactly that. If you made a rule or a law, you couldn't walk it back. You could not repeal it. You couldn't change it. It was there, and it was there for always. And it was kind of there as like a fail-safe so people wouldn't just go making really silly and dumb laws. And so all of the officials, of course, they all know that. And so they decide to take that and also just the fact that any king that existed, they have a really big ego. They like themselves a lot. And so they took all that and they hatched this plan. They knew that they couldn't get Daniel to trip up in his work ethic. He never disobeyed the king. He did it as he was told. He learned everything. But the one thing that set Daniel apart from everybody else was that he was unwavering in his worship to his God. And there's a lot of other kings that had witnessed this. Daniel never wavered on the worship of his God. There was one king who was above any ruler that Daniel served, and that was God. So they decided to trap him there. So now we have our latest crazy promise, which is in keeping with the frail egos of all of the kings who have been in charge in this series. We've had some fun games to play so far along the way. If you go back and watch through, there was a game that was called Interpret the Dream, or Everybody Dies. Really fun game, kind of nice. There was the game of, Bow Down or Get Burned Up, where they did not bow down and they were thrown into a fiery furnace, which is, another fun game. This time, what else do we have? We have, interpretation for big promotion. That one seemed okay. It was kind of fun. And he got the promotion anyways, which was just kind of weird. But now Darius agrees to play the game of pray to me or play with the lions in a pit. And there's more of them than there are of you, so, have fun. That's the game that we get to play today. Pray or play with the lions. And so we're going to see how Daniel responds to this news. Nobody over the next month, if you pray to anyone else other than Darius, you're going to die. So this is picking up in verse 10. This is how Daniel responds. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So listen to that line, just as he had done before. Daniel doesn't go home and hatch some new plan of rebellion against the kingdom. Daniel doesn't go home and just decide to throw all of this away. He can't take this anymore. It's just as he had done before. This is a continuation of a habit that Daniel had already developed. There isn't a breakdown into anger or hopelessness near. It is just as he had done before. For Daniel, this is simply his God-focused devotion. Everything he does and is flows from the fact that God is his one king. He serves God and that's it. It isn't, this isn't malicious. He isn't flipping off King Darius or anything like that. He's like, no, I'm going to keep praying, Darius. Forget that. No, this is just an outpouring of who Daniel really is and what he's all about. Everything is for this audience of one. And his response is pretty remarkable because if you think into your own life, like what do you do when you get news that you really don't like, that you really don't agree with, or when a policy changes that just doesn't sit with you well? Do you feel just kind of defeated and hopeless? Do you feel like somebody just let all the air out of you? Do you take to Facebook to go and complain to the people who will validate how you feel, or do you just continue on with God? Because somehow that's what Daniel is able to do. It is just as he has done before. Daniel works in Darius' administration, but he by no means does it so that he can just, make Darius happy. Daniel isn't even in this for himself. There's no self-preservation here. There's no him doing what he needs to do in order to keep himself safe. Daniel trusts that as long as, as he works hard and he loves people well, he says, I know that God is going to be there to see me through whatever it is that happens. And we see this in every story of Daniel's life. Daniel does everything with integrity. Daniel treats people with honor and respect. Daniel works hard and he works better than anyone. And he doesn't do it for the kings and he doesn't do it for Daniel. But this is what a life that is lived distinctly with God looks like. That's all that it is. And there's places where, Daniel doesn't compromise, and there's things that he doesn't budge on. But Daniel and his friends, there's places where they simply don't move because God is the only God that they serve. But even so, this singular service to this God who Daniel fully trusts is going to come through and be with him. It doesn't, automatically move Daniel to pass go and collect $200 and live a really great, happy life. That's not what happens. He's continually serving God. And this is what happens next. This is picking up in verse 11. It says this. Then these men went as a group, and they found Daniel. So all those people who hatched that plan, they go and they find out that Daniel is praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. So like, hey, Darius, remember this? Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anybody who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, yeah, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, here's the drop of the plan. Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, remember he's not really like us, he's not one of us, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, hey, just one more reminder. According to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. He is really locked into this. And so the king gave the order. And they brought Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. And so the trap works. Daniel gets caught in the unrepealable law, which Darius is now kicking himself over because he's lost somebody who's incredibly valuable and who really does do good work. Daniel has a lot of love and value in Darius's eyes. So as Darius brings Daniel in for punishment, Darius knew all along who it was that Daniel was really serving. It was his God, and that's what he says, right? May your God that I know you serve continually, I hope he comes through for you. And Darius is pondering a very hopeful question that previous kings that Daniel served had to wrestle with as well. May this God who you serve, I hope he comes through for you. I don't know if he will, but I really hope so. And Nebuchadnezzar, a few kings ago, he saw this. He saw God's power, and he learned that only God can rescue in the way that he does. Last week we saw that Belshazzar did not learn this lesson. He did not understand who this God was. He didn't think that God could do anything, and so he ended up being destroyed. But Darius, this is kind of what he's working through now. He's wondering if this God of the Hebrews that Daniel follows really can save Daniel. He hopes so because he values Daniel. He loves the work that he does. But Daniel gets thrown in. And we find out that Darius is in such distress he can't even sleep that night. He's so distraught about what it is that he has done. And so this is what happens the next morning. This is picking up in verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried. Pause for a moment. Just think about how much love and integrity Daniel has worked with in his kingdom, that the king, who doesn't even respect or bow down to the God of the Hebrews, he is so distraught over Daniel that at the very first moment he can, he gets up to go and check and see if he is okay. That's just crazy. That's so much work that Daniel has put in to live distinctly and to have integrity and to build relationship, that the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, he echoes his question from last night, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. It's just so funny that Daniel is just so polite, even to the man who literally just threw him into a pit to die. He's like, hey, king, hope you're doing well. Thank you for this opportunity. How? You would be so upset, right? But Daniel's like, may the king live forever so you can continue to throw people into pits. No. But this is what got Daniel where he is, right? He's gracious. He has integrity. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty. And the king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. No wound was found on him. He had trusted in his God. The story goes on, and Darius is just so happy that Daniel is alive, and then Darius, in true kingly fashion, gives the order that all of the officials who had accused Daniel get thrown in the lion's den, but of course, because he's the king and kind of does things over the top, it wasn't just them, but it was their entire families and all of that too. He's still Darius. He's still got to have a little fun. So he's like, yeah, you and all your families, they all go. And then Darius declares that God, this God of the Hebrews, is the God, and everybody else lives happily ever after. It's an interesting end to the story, but Darius does realize that God is the God who saves. And this kind of brings us to where we're heading for today. So if Daniel really was just living for himself, if Daniel was in this just to see how far he could make it in his own way, then he would have just snapped a long time ago with all of the things that he had to do, with having to try over and over and over and over again. It would not have gone nearly as well as it has. If Daniel had been living for anything else, then the story and the outcomes would have been vastly different. But because Daniel is focused on God, not himself, not his own ability to do things, not his own opportunities to get ahead, because Daniel's focused on God, he is able to continually carry himself distinctly, even in the face of death. Because Daniel drew his strength from the Lord, he was able to play the long game and to regain influence time and time again and to remain distinct in the face of an ever-changing culture. And so if you're taking notes today, this is our only kind of fill in the blank that we have today, and it's the one thing I hope that you remember, and it's that you are only as strong as the king you serve. You are only as strong as the king that you serve. And let's walk through Daniel's story for a moment so that we can see this play out. Well, first, Daniel's strength to live distinctly, Daniel's strength to do any of the things that he did, it didn't come from Daniel. Daniel's strength does not come from himself. It didn't come from how much he hated and condemned the culture that he was a part of and his pride and being so different from them. Daniel's strength, it didn't come just from Daniel. Daniel's strength also didn't come from others. It didn't come from how much he was so good at everything and how everybody accepted him and how everybody, in his pride in himself for being able to have everybody love him or at being such an influence. Daniel's strength didn't come from his obedience even. It didn't come from his obedience to God. It didn't come from how well Daniel served God, because ultimately that means that his strength still would have just come from Daniel. It's his own strength, his own determination. I did all of this. I did all of the right things. I got other people to like me. God, I served you so well. That wasn't where Daniel got any of his strength from. Daniel's strength came from God. Daniel knew that God was the only one who was going to be able to rescue in the way that he did. And Daniel leaned into that for his strength and for his resolve. He had seen God come through in his life again and again, and Daniel is able to be strong, and his friends are able to be strong because his strength comes from a king who was unlike any other king. His strength comes from a king who, as a few of the kings in Daniel's story have noted, there's only one king who saves in this way, and that king is God. The question then is, what way? What makes the way that God comes in so different than any other king, any other power that you can serve? The way that God rescues and saves his people isn't by just waiting until they get good enough and then he finally says, okay, you're there now. Now I'll come and rescue you. You've made your way up to me. Now you're worthy. No. God rescues and God saves by entering into our trials and into our mess and bringing us through them with him. And there's no other religion, there's no other deity who did that. You see, the Persians and a lot of ancient religions thought, like we said, that you had to kind of work yourself into good standing with whatever god it was that you served, that you had to ascend and get near the kings or the gods, that the better you acted or behaved or appeased, the closer you drew to them, and then perhaps they would one day have mercy on you or favor on you or bless you or save you if you did enough. You ended up only being as strong as your efforts if they won you the favor of the king or of the god. And today, in America here, right now, the main king that we serve, the main god we serve is me. Or rather you. You're only as strong as the king of self. And so for a lot of people, it's that you get better. You go find inner peace. You manifest what it is that you want. You find the strength to carry on in yourself. You find the strength to live according to your values within yourself. And you can, but self is only going to carry you so far. But when you're living on your own strength and when you're doing this all for yourself and nothing's going right and then you don't want to keep fighting, everything that you've kind of built up, it ultimately ends up crumbling. And self doesn't support and self doesn't sustain being able to live distinctly for very long. Because King Self is selfish. It's all about self, right? And so the king of self is inherently selfish, and pride cares way more about self-preservation than actual distinctive living. And so King Self is going to direct you to either just give up living for those values, to give up what it is that you're pressing towards, and to, conform because it's easier, or to just sit and complain so that you can feel better and kind of self-righteous instead of doing the hard work of discerning the cultural currents and maintaining the effort of living distinctly. But Daniel shows us something different. Daniel didn't have the strength to make it through because he followed God so well. Daniel had the strength to make it through because he knew the God that he followed. And he knew that God is the only God who can rescue in this way. He's a God who shows up in the middle of your worst times, in the middle of those moments, and walks with you through them. And God did this not because Daniel followed him so well, but because Daniel was loved by God. That is why God rescues and saves. And God does this for us, not because we check all of the boxes of being a good follower of God, but because we are loved by God. God says, I'll do that for you, not because you've checked all the boxes of doing everything right for me, but because you are loved by me. And so we see this all throughout Daniel, right? And because God loved them, there was an angel who entered into the furnace to be with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they were potentially being burned up. He entered into that space with them and rescued them and saved them. Because God loved, there was an angel who went into the pit with Daniel, with all of the lions, who didn't just keep him from that, but walked with him through it and saw him come out on the other side. And because God loved the world, so he sent Jesus, who continually comes into our lives to walk with us and to be with us and to rescue us, because he's the only one who rescues in that way. Not because we follow perfectly, but because we submit to being loved by the one who is perfect. And so when you follow Jesus, if you say, yeah, you know what, I can't do this on my own, I can't continue to have this strength, I've been trying to do this with whatever King Self has given me, and it is not working out, and so I need to have strength somewhere else. When you follow him, when you serve him, when you're wholeheartedly committed, like Daniel is, to this one king, you'll find in him that there is a strength to stand when nobody else can stand. Even when you're thrown into the fire. Even when you're being made an example out of, if Jesus is your one king, then you know that you have a God who rescues and saves like nobody else, because he's the only one who rescues by entering into the suffering with you and walking you through it. You can lean on him. You can be sure that he's going to see you through, because that is what God does. God doesn't wait for us to clean ourselves up before he says, finally, you're worthy of my love. No, we get to come to him because he loved us first. He's willing to suffer with us and walk us through these things because he himself is rescued and saved in this way, that he was willing to subject himself even to death on a cross to bear all of the weight of all of the things that we've done, even when we were very, very, very far from him. He's the only one who rescues in that way. He's the only one who saves in that way. And so we get to see that if we're only as strong as the king that we serve, then Jesus is the king worth serving, because why wouldn't you want to serve the king that rescues and saves like nobody else does? Let's pray. God, you alone do rescue and save in a way that no one else does, that you don't shy away from us, that you don't wait for us, but that you enter into the midst of our pain and our suffering and you walk with us. And so I just pray this morning, God, that wherever we're at, whatever fire, whatever pit, whatever den of lions it is that we're facing, that we're in the midst of, that you would help us to cry out to you. that you would help us to not lean on the strength we have, but that we could know the one King who rescues and saves in this way. That you are worthy, that you are holy, that there is none like you. And that when we give our lives to you, that the love that you have for us is the thing that keeps us going, that the strength that you are, the love that you are, is what we get to lean on. Help us to let go of leaning on ourselves and help us to fall in love with you. In Jesus' name, amen.